So if I said Nostradamus, Edgar Casey, and Gene Dixon, what would those three names have in common? They're all supposed prophets, right? They're all supposedly prophets, or they prophesied. So that brings us to the next question. What is a prophet? Or better said, what is a prophecy? All these three people were supposedly prophets who did something special that made everybody listen to what they had to say. What was it that they did? What is a prophecy? Yeah, it's a foretelling or a prediction of what is to come. If you believe biblically like I do, it's telling history in advance, right? It's telling history in advance. Now, park that in your mind for a moment. We'll go back to that. How many of you have ever taken statistics in school? Okay. I'm not a math person, so to speak. I can do basic, simple math, but once you have to start memorizing equations, then I'm out. But statistics are really complicated math, right? They're really, really tough. If you've taken statistics, though, this will make sense to you. Who knows what the odds are of your being struck by lightning today? What are the odds that you'll be struck by lightning today? 1 in 250 million. There's a 1 in 250 million chance that you'll be struck by lightning. Now, however, if we were to take that and say, how great are the odds that you might be struck by lightning throughout your entire lifetime? Anybody got a guess as to what that would be? It's a lot lower. I was amazed with how low it is. There's a 1 in 9,100% chance that you'll be struck by lightning in your life. And if you live in South Carolina, every summer afternoon those rates increase, right? So how about this? With this idea of statistics and prophecies in our mind, how about this? What is the probability that Jesus of Nazareth could have fulfilled just 8? Only 8. Now, there were hundreds of prophecies about this Jesus of Nazareth. I hope that you know that. The Old Testament is full of them. But what are the odds that Jesus from Nazareth could have fulfilled just 8 of those hundreds of prophecies that were predicted of him? I actually read behind this really smart guy. His name is Professor Peter W. Stoner. And he speaks in a book called Science Speaks. And he actually did the math on this. So his numbers were as follows. He said that the odds of Jesus being able to fulfill just 8 of the hundreds of prophecies about him were 1 times 10 to the 17th power. 1 times 10 to the 17th power. That's a lot of commas, that's a lot of zeros. That's actually 1 quadrillion. So I didn't know that, I had to check. But if you wanted to know all those zeros, 17 of them after the 1 with all those commas, that equals 1 quadrillion. So there's 1 in 1 quadrillion chance that Jesus of Nazareth could have fulfilled just 8 of the hundreds of prophecies that predict him. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. That number is so big, I can't even get my mind around it. When you start getting up into the billions, I lose it. That's just a big number. I have a hard time with it. How many of you can just, like quadrillion, that's just too big a number, Stuart. That's almost so big it almost seems illusionary. I can't get my mind. All right, let me tie it together for you. Let's use a bit of an illustration. I'll break it down. Most of you know that I lived in Texas for a pretty good percentage of my life. I went to high school out there. Texas is a really, really big state. I lived there. I've had to drive across it several different times, so I know how long it takes to drive across the state of Texas. Right? It's a long drive. In fact, it's 685 miles wide to get across Texas, right? And it's 268,601 square miles in Texas. Now, here's where this makes sense. Now, if we were to take silver dollars, and if I were to take silver dollars, 1 times 10 to the 17th power, 1 quadrillion silver dollars. They're 1.5 inches apiece. If I were to take those and spread them out over the entire face of Texas, they would be 2 feet deep. Picture it, right? The state of Texas covered 2 feet deep with Susan B. Anthony dollars, right? Now, let's take this a step further. Now, let's say I mark one of those silver dollars. I mark one, just one. And I take it and I put that mark on it, and then I take a man and after I've taken that marked silver dollar and I've scrambled it into all these quadrillion silver dollars in Texas, right? So they're 2 feet deep. I go out there, I hide this silver dollar in this massive mound of money. You picturing it? You with me? Okay, and so I take a guy and I blindfold him. And I stick him right in the middle of the Metroplex. I say, okay, you're right here at Jerry World, right in the middle of Arlington, right, Dallas-Fort Worth. And I say, okay, you can walk however far you want, you can dig however much you want, but you have to reach down into this pile of silver dollars, and you have to pick the one that I've marked on your first effort. You with me? That's the odds that Jesus Christ of Nazareth could have fulfilled just 8 of the hundreds of prophecies that were predicted about him. Now, we know there's no chance of that guy finding. If we gave him the rest of his life without the blindfold, he'd never find that thing, right? No one in his right mind could think that he would. So why would we as Christians believe the exact same number of odds about this guy that was born 2,000 years ago and lived in the Middle East? That's our backdrop for today, okay? Statistics, prophecies. What are the odds that Jesus is who we think that he is? So we're going to look at today the prophecies of the coming of Jesus. This candle that was lit today by Hudson, again, famously, with a great reading, depicts the prophetic Jesus, the predicted Jesus, the promised Jesus, the Jesus that was to come then. You with me? So, as we read these texts, and the ones that Hudson read, if you paid attention, all of the words, all the verbs in that text are present tense. They're speaking as if it was happening already, or had already happened even, some of them. So let's read through it again. We're in chapter 9 of Isaiah. We're going to begin in verse 2. Chapter 9 of Isaiah, beginning in verse 2. I'll give you a moment to get there. And you're going to want to put your finger there, and then the other text that Hudson read so well for us is actually in Isaiah 7. We'll start in chapter 9, but put your finger on 7. We'll go to there in a moment. All right, so you with me in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2? We all there? Okay, here's what the text says. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. Right? Now, if you believe like we believe, because of sin, because of the failure in the garden, because of the fact that we're born into sin, people are born into darkness. They're born into the darkness. Jesus said that very descriptively in John chapter 3 as he talked to Nicodemus. But he also said, look, you are born in the dark, you'll live your entire life in the dark, but I'm the light. I have come to bring light to the world. So here's what I want you to picture for me, especially as you look at this candle. When we're born in our natures, straight out of our mama's tummy and right into the nursery, we're already born in sin, we're already sinners, we're born in darkness. Without something changing in our lives, we will live our entire lives, however many decades that is, in complete darkness. And then when we pass on out of this life, we'll go to a place of utter darkness, or the Bible calls it a darkness that could be felt. So you live your entire life in the dark, and then you pass on and you go to the next life, and you live in some more real dark. And needless to say, it's hotter there than it is in here this morning, right? So from the dark to the dark, from judgment to judgment. Death reigns in the darkness. You know this, right? Nothing lives in the dark. It can't grow in the dark. Why did God's Messiah come? Why was this Messiah promised to the world? To shine light into this darkness. I like to look at it like this. Jesus came so that he could poke holes in the darkness of our existence. His light shined out, and it would poke holes in the darkness of our existence anywhere where we allowed him to do that. Right? Anywhere by faith we accepted him, he would shine a light like a sunrise rising in the east and poking holes in the darkness of the world. That's what this text is telling us. It says, next, you have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you as they rejoice at harvest time, and as they rejoice when dividing spoils, right? So, picture this with me. God's Messiah was sent into a kingdom of complete darkness, but he was sent to bring a kingdom of joy in the midst of that darkness. Is this making sense? A terrible, decrepit, sinful, as Mike has already said, we're just dirty, rotten, filthy, stinking sinners, and that's the way we're born, and that's the way we live, and without something intervening, that's the way it's always going to be. But Jesus shined a light, the Messiah shined a light into that darkness, and he came to put joy in the midst of the darkness. That's why he came. A kingdom of joy. If you're around here very much, it's important that you start getting your mind around the fact that God came to establish a kingdom where Jesus rules and reigns in the hearts of people. And because of his rule and reign in the hearts of people, their lives shine like a light, and they spread his love and his joy into the darkness of their own world. So we then, in turn, poke holes in the darkness of our own worlds as Jesus poked a hole in the darkness of our own. So it's a joy like the farmer who has worked hard all planting season. He's dug. He's plowed. He's sown seeds. He's pulled weeds. I can tell y'all don't understand that. I used to be a bad youngin', right? I was bad. And I got to the place where when I was coming up, the children in the room, whether you know this or not, when I was coming up, if you acted bad, you got your tail tore up. You got one more whooping. And if you have my daddy, you might get two. But I got to the place where I said, well, you know what? I like doing what I want to do. I don't really care. I'll take a whooping and do what I want. If they catch me, I'll take the whooping because it's worth it to me to go out and act a fool. Well, my mama being my mama got wise to that. And she realized that I was just taking the whooping and doing what I wanted to do. So she come up with something else. Instead of telling my daddy to whoop me when I acted a fool, she made me go out in her garden and pull weeds. Oh, good Lord, just beat me. Hell on earth is pulling weeds. Now, some of y'all like it. I don't get it. Right? But if you tell me I had to dig in the field, break a sweat, plow behind the oxen, and then sow my seeds, keep the birds out of it, build a scarecrow, pull the confound weeds, when it came time to harvest, I'd be happy. I'd be joyous. There'd be a joy in me when I harvested the real fruit of all my hard labor. You with me? That's the kind of joy that the kingdom of God came to bring. And it also goes on to say, it's like the coming joy when an army, a conquering army, a victorious army gets to divide the spoils of what they've won. To the victor go the spoils. So when an army wins a battle, they get to divvy up all the stuff they took from the people who they conquered. So theoretically, if you win a battle, you go get a little bit richer. I don't know about you, but if I happen to have a little bit more folded money in my pocket, it make me happy. No? Oh, y'all got that money you ain't even counted yet. See, I'm married. I ain't got no money. So it's nice for me to get a little folded money. And then we carry on with this. He says in verse 4, "For you have shattered the oppressive yoke and the rod of their shoulders, the staff of their oppressor, just as you did in the day of Midian." That's important. "For the trampling boot of battle and the bloody garments of war will be burned as fuel for the fire." Now, these powers that have choked down, beaten down the life in the world, that have provided this darkness and tried to stop Jesus' light from shining, trying to stop this joyous kingdom from coming, have already been crushed. Read the end of the book. We win. The thing about it is, it's prophetic. It's as good as if it happened. It just ain't happened yet. I knew if I got caught, I was going to be pulling some weeds. It was guaranteed. The return of Christ and the victory over darkness and evil is as good as if it's already happened. It just hasn't happened yet. Therein is our hope. We believe that, so we have hope in that. That's a very important Christian principle. And at that point, all the bloodied instruments of war, all the violence, all the destruction, all the innocent bloodshed will be fuel for the flames of peace. It'll be as if there's this big, huge bonfire celebrating peace, and all the weapons, all the evil, starting to make sense? Will be thrown into those fires as a celebration of peace. Now, Isaiah compares this to a very important event. He compares it to a victory at a place called Midian. How many of you have heard of Midian? Now, let me tell you the story quickly. I know what time it is, but Midian tells the story of a guy named Gideon. Heard of Gideon? And so this guy named Gideon was a judge in the Old Testament. If you've been with us for the past 5 weeks, we've been studying the book of Ruth. Ruth took place during the time of the Judges. The Judges was a time in Israel where everybody just did whatever they wanted to do, whatever they thought was right, they did, and because of that, their situation sometimes got bad. It's potentially true that this exact story that we're talking about happened at the exact same time as the story of Ruth. Remember when we talked about when the famine could have occurred that Ruth's story had in it? And we said there's a pretty good chance it happened during the time of the judge Gideon. I believe that. Now here's the parallel that puts these two together. But to make sure we catch up, the people of God are in rebellion. They're doing whatever seems right in their own eyes. So God, as He tends to do, He didn't make them pull weeds, but He reprimanded them. He sent a famine. He sent a famine upon the people. Now, how did He send the famine upon His people? He did it through Midian. The armies of Midian came into Israel, they conquered it, and any time that the Israelites tried to build or grow plants, they burned them. Anytime they tried to sow in the field, they burned it. So there was nothing to eat because Midian guaranteed that these people would have nothing to eat. They're in an extreme time of reprimand. That's what caused Elimelech to retreat and run away from Israel and go off to Moab. Big mistake on his part, but you can kind of understand it. If there ain't nothing to eat, if you go down to the whatever the name of that store is in Swansea, I ain't never been in, but I hear they got groceries in there. But if you go in there and there ain't no groceries, you're going to make other arrangements. Because every once in a while, you got to have a chicken wing, right? So he says, well, I got to feed my family. I got to do something. I got to get out of here. So he retreats. While Elimelech retreated into Moab, all the people of God are retreating. Picture this, at this time in this history, they're hiding in caves. They're hiding in the mountains. They're hiding anywhere they can go and hide because Midian has absolutely conquered them. They're going to reign. Midian reigned over them for 7 years. That was the reprimand from God. Now, eventually, after retreating and hiding, they had the resolve to cry out to God and say, oh man, we're in trouble, God, help us. Well, as God is prone to do, He invited them to return to Him. He said to His people, look, return to me, repent and return to me. And He sent a prophet to them to give them the message of repentance and what it was going to take to get them out from under the reprimand of Midian. Is this making sense? You sure? Don't look at me like I got two heads. Okay, and He says, look, if you will just follow me out of this evil, if you'll follow this judge out of this evil, I'll give you rest and peace. We can go back to the way things are supposed to be. Now, the angel of the Lord, who is Jesus in the Old Testament for the record, when you read angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, that's a pre-incarnate, a pre-advent Jesus appearing to people of this world. So the pre-incarnate, the pre-birth in Bethlehem Jesus appears under this tree in an area called Megiddo. Very important place in the Bible. We'll talk about it later. But He appears under this tree at Oprah. You know her. She's named after a tree in a region. And the angel of the Lord appears there, and here's this guy Gideon. And what Gideon's doing, he's in the wine press, he's in the threshing floor. Remember we talked about that? He's trying to take some of his grapes and hide them from the Midianites so he'll have something to drink and eat. So he's sneaking around trying to keep some of his harvest because they're burning everything. While he's doing that, the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, look, here's what I want you to do. I'm going to be with you. I want you to deliver the people of Israel. And Gideon says, oh man, you don't understand. Not only am I weak, I'm from the weakest tribe. I'm from the weakest tribe of our people, and I'm weak among them. And the angel of the Lord says something very important. The same thing He says to you today, the same thing He says to me today. He says, look, Gideon, I'm going to be with you. God says, look, I'll be with you. I got you. You may face the fires. You may face the famine. You may face any number of awful possibilities, but look, son, I'm going to be with you. You will be okay. Now, Gideon's a frightful guy, but he kind of does trust God a little bit, and then the angel of the Lord tells him to do something kind of crazy. He said, I want you to go up on the hill. Gideon's daddy, Joash, had done something really stupid. He built an Asherah pole, and he built a worship spot to a god called Baal. It's really bad. He's pagan out. He done went and he's followed after other gods. He's doing whatever seems right to him. He's worshiping whoever he wants to worship. And so the angel of the Lord tells Gideon, I want you to go up on that hill, and I want you to chop down that Asherah pole, and I want you to tear down the altar of Baal. And Gideon says, oh, wait, hamana. When I do that, they're going to kill me. He says, look, if you're going to be with me, you wait right here. He tells the angel of the Lord, wait right here. I'm going to go get some things to sacrifice to you. Now remember, it's a famine. Ain't nobody got nothing to eat. But Gideon says, look, wait right here. I'm going to go get some broth. I'm going to go get some grain. I'm going to go get an animal to sacrifice, and I'm going to come back and sacrifice it to you. If you're still here when I get back, I know you're going to be with me. So he does that. He comes back. Here's something really cool. So he's got this sacrifice. He's got this broth. He's got this grain. And the angel of the Lord says to Gideon, here's what I want you to do. I want you to slaughter the animal. I want you to take the grain. I want you to put it on this rock, this altar that you've built. And then I want you to take that broth, and I want you to soak it. Soak it wet. Right? So he did that. And then the angel of the Lord tapped that stone. That sacrifice was consumed by fire. And Gideon says, I guess you are going to be with me. I guess I can do this. So he goes out. Now, he's still a bit of a coward, this Gideon. So he goes out in the middle of the night. He cuts down his daddy's Asherah pole, he tears down this altar of Baal, and he uses the wood from the Asherah pole to build an altar to God, and he sacrifices before God in the middle of the night. That way he hopes nobody won't catch him. He's trying to do what God wants to do, but he's trying to do it without any ramifications. That's what we do, ain't it? So, come the next morning, the men of the village get up and start looking around. So, what happened to our Asherah pole? Where's our Baal altar? God, our gods are not going to bless us. Somebody has come in here and destroyed our place of worship. They did some research. And they find out that it was Gideon that did it. So they go to his daddy's tent and they say to Joash, look, send your boy out here. We got something for him. Daggum church breaker, church burner. And Joash, this man of no faith, this pagan, when it's his son on the line, he says, look, you say he tore down Baal's altar? Yes, he did. Well, then let Baal defend himself. If Baal's a god and he's that tough, let Baal do something about it. You don't need to do anything to Gideon. If Baal's a real god, Baal will take care of it. For whatever reason, they must have listened to that because they let Gideon go. And they let him move on. Now, from there, we're going to fast forward in the story. Gideon sounds the shofar, he sounds the ram's horn, and he calls all the people of Israel together to get ready to go to battle with Midian. The Midianites, Bo, if you were on a mountain and you looked down in the valley, it said they looked like a plague of locusts. There was more camels than there was sand on the seashore. The army was so big, there's no way Israel, with their 22,000 men, could have done anything to conquer Midian. It is unbelievable odds. But Gideon calls the people of God together. He's got 22,000 of them. And the angel of the Lord says, this is too many. You tell anybody that's afraid, they can go home. 12,000 of them went home. 10,000 left. The angel of the Lord said to Gideon, what? There's still too many. We need to pare this army down even further. Here's what I want you to do. Send them all down to the river. Have them all go and drink. The ones who pull the water up and lap from their hands, we're going to keep. The ones that just stick the face down in the water and drink, we're going to let go. That's exactly what happened. Guess how many actually were left after the process? Tell us. 300. 300 men to face the armies of Midian. I guess that whole angel of the Lord saying, I'm going to be with you is a big deal. But Gideon says, okay, God, I'm still scared. I know you say you're going to be with me. I know you burnt the sacrifice and all this. You kept me alive, but I'm just still afraid. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to take this fleece. You ever heard of Gideon's fleece? Gideon says, I'm going to take this fleece and I'm going to put it on the ground. And in the morning when the sun comes up, I want there to be no dew on the ground around the fleece, but I want the fleece to be wet from dew. You track it with me? So he gets up in the morning, he goes to the fleece, there it is. It's soaking wet, everything around is dry. He wrings it out and says, look, God, one more thing for you. Let's flip it around. Tonight I'm going to put the fleece down. I want you to wet the ground around the fleece, but don't wet the fleece. Guess what God did? Got up in the morning, fleece was dry, the ground around the fleece was wet. So finally Gideon realized that he needed to follow God into battle. He's still afraid. And the angel of the Lord senses this and says, all right, Gideon, y'all go to war. You got them. I didn't give them to you. If you're still afraid, though, I want you to take your servant. Y'all go in and spy these people out. Just hang out outside of their tent and see what they're saying. Everybody still with me? So they do that. They go down to the Midianite camp. They all sneak up on this tent, and here's what they hear. They hear this one guy telling this other guy, oh, my goodness, man, I had a nightmare last night, and a loaf of bread rolled down a hill, hit our tent, killed every last one of us. We got killed by a loaf of bread. And the other one said, that's none other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash. God has already handed us into their hands. The people, pagan, believed God more than Gideon did. Didn't matter about the numbers. They just believed the prophetic vision that was given to them that they were in trouble. Well, now finally, Gideon goes back and he's finally brave enough to do this thing. So he divides his people up into 3 groups of 100. Remember, he's only got 300 soldiers left. He divides them up into 3 groups of 100. He gives every one of them a sword, a trumpet, and then a pitcher that's empty, and it's got a torch burning inside of it. And he says, when I call out and I blow the shofar, when I blow the trumpet, I want you to shout like a bunch of banshees. And then follow me and do what I do. So if you know the story, he waited till the middle of the night, in the middle of the second watch. Those guys are probably half asleep. They've been out there all night. You know how watch is. These Israelites ain't coming. So in the middle of that watch, they're asleep. Here comes Gideon. He says, now. In the name of Gideon and the Lord's army. And they smash those pitchers with the torches inside of them. And all of a sudden, all the Midianites can see is they're surrounded. Because where there's every light, they assume there's a troop of men. Long story short, the Midianite army killed themselves. God turned them on each other. They fought with each other themselves, and then the Israelites chased them out of their country. Now that's a long story. But imagine you're Gideon. What are you nodding about? Imagine you're Gideon at the end of this long story. How would you feel? Imagine you're one of those 300 people that followed Gideon into this battle. How would you feel when God had done this? Would you be happy? Would you be believing God for a minute? That's the kind of joy that the kingdom of Jesus, the kingdom of Messiah, is bringing into the world. The kind of joy that army felt when, with insurmountable odds, they were still victorious in the name of Jesus Christ. That's the kind of joy they had. Verse 6 and 7. For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us. This will all be brought about by a child's birth. Now imagine this. We're going to do all this great stuff. It's going to be because of an infant. But not just any birth with any child. Now is when you need to flip over to Isaiah 7. If you don't want to flip, it'll be on the screen for you. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel. You know what Emmanuel means? God with us. God with us. There'll be a baby born who is going to be God with us. Advent celebrates the birth of Emmanuel. Advent celebrates the birth of God with us. Shining lights in the darkness, bringing joy in the midst of sorrow. A conquering army that cannot be stopped in the name of Jesus. In fact, he goes on to tell us about that. He says, and the government will be where? On his shoulders. Whose? Emmanuel's. The government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. How many of you have heard this text before? Oh my goodness, go home and read it if you haven't. This is a linchpin of the Christian faith. And then it goes on to say, the dominion will be vast, and its prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now and forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Let's work through quickly what these phrases mean. What's the first one? He will be called what? This is where your sheet will come in handy. He will be called Wonderful Counselor. You know what this Messiah, this Emmanuel, offers to the people who believe him? Divine advice. We're not going to Nostradamus. We're not going to Edgar Cayce. We're not going to Gene Dixon. We're going to the God of the universe to gain advice for our lives, and he's offering it. The Wonderful Counselor will speak wisdom into our lives. But not only can he speak wisdom into it, not only is he a wonderful counselor, he's also the mighty God. So he can give us divine advice. He also has the clout and the power to back it up. He can go with 300 men and conquer the Midianites because he's God. So you have a divine warrior who is going to battle for you. Later on, make a note. Go to Jeremiah 32 and read verses 17 and 18 that talk about this unbelievable mighty God, this divine warrior. How many of you are fairly familiar with contemporary Christian music? Okay, there's a song called Mighty to Save. You know the song, Mighty to Save? That's a transliteration of this expression. My God goes to battle for me. He is mighty to save me. No matter the odds, he has the best advice for me, and he has the power to back up his advice. He's going to deliver for me because he's the mighty God. He's also the eternal Father. Now, don't mistake this as saying that the Messiah is actually God the Father. It's a play on words. What that really means is he is our everlasting or divine daddy. He brings God's presence to us. He is the physical expression of the Abba Father, which is our way of saying, oh, Daddy, Papa, God my Father in heaven. He is the Abba of eternity. He is the divine daddy who is everlasting and will never end. And not just that, he's the Prince of Peace. He's the Prince of Peace. He will bring a kingdom. He will rule over a kingdom that is of divine unity. We love to talk about peace and we love to talk about being unified, but are you aware that for two people can't even be unified? But you put a group of people together, the only way you can have unity there is if God gets in the middle of it and unifies it himself. And what he's saying is, I'm going to unify the people of the earth. I'm going to do it universally. Everyone who will follow my light will be brought together in unity. It will be a kingdom of peace, and I am the prince of that kingdom of peace. I am the divine ruler of a kingdom of divine unity. That's what we have coming in the future. That's why we can say we win. Now let's put it all together. Normally I try to make your big ideas or your statements very short, but for this week it's a little bit longer. But here's what I want you to take home with you today. Jesus Christ the Messiah offers us divine advice. He is our wonderful counselor. He gives us the very words of God and expresses those God's counsel to us. But not only that, He has the power to back it up. Right? Because He's our divine warrior. He's our mighty God. We should never, ever fear. Ever. Why? Because He's our everlasting divine daddy. He is always going to be there for us. There will never come a time when He will not be there for us. His love is undying. He'll always be present with us. And His coming kingdom, the coming kingdom, will prove that He is a universal ruler of peace, of divine unity. He is the Prince of Peace. That's what the prophetic promise of Messiah promised to bring to the world. So the question is, do you have these things in your life? Because if you don't, it's because you've not chosen to have them yet. Now think back to our story, the long story I shared with you about Gideon. The reason I went into such great detail about Gideon is because if you'll think back to the story I told you, every single one of these attributes of God is present in Gideon's story. Right? This wonderful counsel from the angel of the Lord. But not only did he have the counsel and the advice about what to do, he had the power for Gideon to back it up. The few against the many. He's the everlasting Father. He says to Gideon, look, son, I'm going to be with you. It's okay. I'll be with you. I'm never going to go anywhere. I'm always going to be with you. And when it's all said and done, I'm going to bring peace to your people. Can you see the expression of Messiah in the life of Gideon and his experience with the Midianites? Go home and read it again if you can't, because it's all there. Now think about this. God went to all this trouble to give us hundreds of prophecies, not just 8, hundreds of prophecies that would dictate the entire framework of the life of the Messiah. Jesus' life was predicted to the nth degree, to the finest detail, and Jesus met every single divine appointment. He was always where He was supposed to be, when He was supposed to be there, doing exactly what He was supposed to be doing. The odds against that are impossible, but God did it. His entire human existence was on a precise schedule that was from God. That's amazing. That is miraculous. When you walk out of here today and you drive out, you could turn left and have a billion different possibilities. You can turn right and have a billion others. Just in one choice. Every single one of Jesus' choices was right on time with God. He's an on-time Messiah, bringing us to an on-time God. That's an old spiritual. You ought to know. If you don't, you need to check it out. Now, this teaches us a few things. Number one, God wanted the world to be able to determine who the Messiah was. God wanted the world to know who Messiah was because He predicted it in all this detail. Anybody that doesn't realize Jesus is the Messiah doesn't want to realize that Jesus is the Messiah. They don't want to admit the truth because God wanted to draw the entire world out of darkness and into light. Number two, Jesus has to be the Messiah. He must be the Messiah because nobody ever will, ever has, ever could fulfill all the prophecies that He fulfilled in His life. It's not possible what Jesus did, and yet He did it. He has to be the Messiah. Do you know how many people have gone out to prove that Jesus wasn't the Messiah and on the preponderance of the evidence realized that He was? Many. And here's the last one. And this is the one you need to hear today, because this is probably all repetition. This isn't going to change your life at all. I hope it does, but it may not. This statement should change your life. This God we're talking about, this messianic presence that we're talking about, is aware of every little tiny specific detail of your life. Everyone. I used to have this problem. I thought, well, this stuff's too small to take to God. He don't care about this little stuff. He expects me to take care of some stuff on my own. I ain't going to bother God with the little stuff. Any of you like that? Guess what? That's pagan. That's not good thinking. How many of you are mamas and daddies? What could happen in the life of your children that you wouldn't care about? What if it's small? You care. What if it's huge? Of course you care. The God of the universe has the same care for us as His children. There is nothing in our lives that is too small for Him to care about, and there's nothing in our lives that are too big for Him to handle. That's where I should have got a witness, right? This is a good day to thank God and praise Him for the fact of the things that He brings to us in this promised Messiah, this promised Emmanuel, this God with us, and this fulfillment of the advent of Christ and His prophetic predictions. Because Jesus is exactly who He said He was. And if you don't know that, I really feel for you. You should not leave here today until you find it out. We're going to put some folks in the pool here in a minute who have figured it out. They've met Jesus, and they've come to the altar to do business with God on His terms, and now they will never be the same again because Emmanuel fights for them in every little detail of their lives.